Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session. This is the first session of Module 6, and we're going to do something slightly different to what we've done before. We're going to use this session to prepare for a debate at the end of the week. And we've got a very interesting debate topic that we want you to consider. The topic is really about the allocation of human resources and financial resources in health. And we're trying to think about this with respect to your essay topic around Depo-Provera. So the topic is, with reference to the STEEP framework and in the context of resource allocation, Depo-Provera should be the first line of contraception. So I've asked Catherine Burns to join us on this call. Hi, Catherine.
Hello, lovely to be here, Stephen. Thank you.
So Catherine, I thought to help the students out in preparation for the debate, we are going to think about this topic in three different ways. First of all, I think it's very useful to give a little bit of historical contextual background to Depo-Provera. And we've chosen 4 readings that are quite useful in painting this picture. We've got a reading by Carol Kaufman as early as 1998, who gives a historical context of Depo-Provera. And then we go into different country contexts. We look at Thomas Volscher from 2011, who unpacks the history of Depo globally, but he refers specifically to the US. And we also look at Amy Kaler in 2007, who gives reference to Zimbabwe and the changing history of Depo in Zimbabwe. And then, of course, we've included a reading by yourself and Crew. What is her first name?
Mary Crew.
Mary Crew, that's correct. And quite recently in 2018, where we talk about justice and human rights. So can I just hand over to you? In the context of the STEEP framework, here we're talking about safety, timely issues, efficiency, effectiveness, equity, and patient-centeredness. If we think about these issues in relation to the historical context of Depo, could you perhaps trace a bit of a trajectory, historical trajectory around Depo-Provera?
Absolutely. In terms of equity and patient-centeredness, if you take South Africa as our starting point, you could never argue that Depo-Provera between the late 1960s through to the early 1990s was designed as a health systems intervention with patient-centeredness in mind or with equity in mind. In fact, during the apartheid era, the cabinet that was convened by the then Prime Ministers of South Africa took a decision, which has been widely written about, and Carol Kaufman traces this for the students, took a decision that they were going to try and control population growth amongst Black South Africans. They were going to try and thwart it or contain it. At the same time, they were going to try and offer tax breaks and other initiatives to amplify or to increase the fertility rate of the white population. So they had an explicit racial agenda, and this was in the style of the apartheid state. There were nuances and particularities that would focus on people that were called colored and Indian, and there were also interventions that would be tooled slightly differently for urban and rural communities. So this is in line with a kind of international history of racist and even eugenicist-inspired population control. This wasn't population control from the bottom up. This was population control from the top down. Now, this doesn't mean that the use of Depo-Provera and the targeting of Depo-Provera at Black women was always experienced negatively by Black women. We'll come back to that in our second segment. But it is absolutely clear that that was the government's intention. How it played out was a little more complicated. This was so powerful and so widely recognized at the time that neighboring countries that were going through their own struggles for independence through the 70s and 80s, such as Zimbabwe, what was then called Rhodesia, the communities of people who were struggling against white minority rule began to see the use of Depo-Provera as tightly linked to, absolutely linked to white control. So in the struggle for freedom in our neighboring countries, people associated the use of Depo-Provera with white minority governments. And this was also true for many of the Black consciousness activists in South Africa. So when we get to the very end of the period of apartheid rule, and we look at how Namibia, Mozambique, Zimbabwe have all gained independence in the previous 20 years, we see this very strong sensibility that use of Depo-Provera as a contraceptive is seen as negative ideologically. And one of the fascinating points that Volsho brings up in his study of the United States and other countries in the world is that the use of Depo-Provera was often seen as a target at minority communities in the United States, people of Latino, Indigenous American, African American backgrounds, but in Eastern Europe and in North America, often targeted at the poorest women, at women that are considered to be drug users or not potentially moral persons in society. So really the overarching theme that Mary Crew and I tagged in that publication in 2017, and we've just recommended the students read a few pages, is that there was considered to be a heavy ideological burden on the use and targeting of Depo-Provera in many countries of the world, and especially in South Africa, as we get to the period 1990 to 1994.